In November 1995, inside a cramped monitoring room at North Lake Prison in Kingsford County, a security officer was reviewing archived surveillance tapes. The task was routine, rarely producing anything of importance. But that afternoon, one piece of footage stood out. It showed a young inmate escorted into the medical storeroom with a nurse. The door closed, and for the next 18 minutes, nothing was recorded. That silent gap would become the first fragment of evidence leading to one of the most infamous scandals in the history of the British prison system. The inmate was Adrian Cole, at just 23 years old, serving a sentence for grievous bodily harm after a nightclub assault. He would be at the center of a case that saw 18 female staff members, officers, nurses, and clerks linked to pregnancies within less than a year of his arrival. On paper, North Lake Prison was a model facility. Opened in 1992, it held space for 600 male prisoners under medium security. The design was modern, the layout deliberate, with high walls, electronic gates, and strict separation of living units. Yet beneath the appearance of control, the foundations were already failing. Oversight was inconsistent, rules were bent and ignored. Professional boundaries began to erode until they ceased to exist. To many, the name Adrian Cole recalled a privileged young man from Ravensport, tall, confident, strikingly attractive, heir to a wealthy family. But within the gray concrete walls of North Lake, his presence triggered something far more dangerous. Letters arrived in unusual volumes, some scented with perfume, others sealed with lipstick. Female officers extended routine checks at his cell, nurses lingered over minor medical complaints, visits stretching to 40 minutes when the average was 10. All of it was observed, none of it was stopped. Among the inmates, whispers spread about the so-called Prince of North Lake. They spoke openly of favoritism, of women competing for his attention. Management received warnings, but remained silent. That silence carried a price. By the autumn of 1995, the first pregnancies surfaced, and every path led back to Adrian Cole. It was then that the National Prison Investigation Agency intervened, under the codename Operation Greyhall. Investigators began dismantling the web Cole had built. Hours of footage were duplicated under strict custody. Escort logs were examined line by line. DNA samples were discreetly collected from infants born to former staff. Each layer, stripped away, revealed the same disturbing reality: at least 18 women had violated their oath of service, drawn into illicit relationships with a single inmate. This case did not simply reveal the influence of one prisoner, it exposed systemic weaknesses across the prison service. It showed how unchecked familiarity between staff and inmates could evolve into a collapse of order. And it forced the question, how could such widespread misconduct happen inside a facility designed for control? What follows is not just the account of Adrian Cole, nor the staff who crossed the line. It is the record of how professional boundaries disintegrated, how oversight failed, and how one scandal redefined prison policy for an entire nation. Adrian Cole was born in 1972 in Ravensport, an affluent town known for its sprawling estates and well-connected families. His father ran one of the largest construction firms in the county. His mother owned a chain of luxury spas across the capital. From the start, he grew up surrounded by wealth, privilege, and expectation. At Ravensport High School, he stood out for reasons beyond family influence. His height, athletic build, and self-assured presence earned him attention wherever he went. For 3 consecutive years, classmates voted him the most attractive male student. On Valentine's Day, hundreds of letters filled his locker. Some years, the number reached into the thousands. He carried that attention into adulthood. After high school, Cole studied hospitality management at the University of Lakeshore. He graduated with ease and began work as a junior manager at a 5-star hotel. Colleagues described him as ambitious, charismatic, and highly aware of the effect he had on women. But beneath the polished exterior was a streak of volatility that would soon alter the course of his life. In September 1994, Cole was involved in a violent altercation at a nightclub in central Ravensport. Witnesses said a verbal dispute escalated when he struck another man with a glass bottle, causing severe facial injuries. His defense claimed provocation, but the court ruled the assault as excessive and deliberate. He was convicted of grievous bodily harm and sentenced to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 2.5. On January 12, 1995, Adrian Cole entered North Lake Prison. Intake officers recorded his calm demeanor and polite cooperation. His physical condition and self-discipline distinguished him from the average inmate. He was placed in K Block, housed in a single cell, and given standard privileges. But within days, both staff and prisoners began to notice him, his composed speech, his athletic frame, and the way he carried himself earned him the nickname that would follow him, the Prince of North Lake. North Lake Prison itself was still considered new at the time. Built in 1992, the facility held capacity for 1,600 men. The design separated housing blocks with walls and electronic gates, but staff of both genders shared administrative offices, the medical wing, and workshops. The workforce numbered just over 300 employees, nearly a third of them women. They worked as correctional officers, nurses, and clerical staff in theory. Procedures were in place to prevent personal contact from crossing professional boundaries. In practice, the rules were only as strong as the willingness of supervisors to enforce them. Cole quickly became an anomaly inside this controlled environment. Female staff lingered longer than necessary during their shifts in K Block. Nurses extended medical visits for complaints as minor as headaches. Letters began arriving in volumes far beyond the norm for a prisoner serving time for violence. Prisoners noticed, staff whispered, but no action was taken. In less than a month, the presence of one inmate had already disrupted the balance of an institution designed to contain over 1,000 men. The warning signs were visible, but the system looked away. By the spring of 1995, Adrian Cole's influence inside North Lake could no longer be ignored. What began as subtle attention had evolved into a clear pattern: extended contact, private conversations, and unexplained movements across secure areas. In March, the volume of mail addressed to Cole doubled. Many envelopes carried perfume scents, some sealed with lipstick. Disturbingly, several letters came from women employed inside the prison. Policy required all personal correspondence between staff and inmates to be declared and logged. In Cole's case, the rule was quietly ignored. Correctional officers and other units noticed that certain female colleagues were volunteering for K Block shifts far more often than duty rosters required. Inmates also observed the change. Some later reported that they saw Cole speaking through his cell door with female officers for long stretches of time. Under normal conditions, such breaches would have resulted in disciplinary action. In Cole's case, nothing happened. On May 14, 1995, the first undeniable breach was captured on surveillance cameras. The footage showed Cole being escorted by a female officer into the prison storage building. He remained inside for 17 minutes. The officer later claimed she had taken him there to collect cleaning supplies. The explanation was never corroborated, and the report was quietly shelved. In June, 2 civilian clerks from the administrative office began making unexplained trips to K Block. Their roles did not involve inmate contact, yet logs showed them entering the unit on 3 separate occasions, each time staying between 20 and 30 minutes near Cole's cell. Both later admitted they had smuggled him extra food from the staff canteen. By July, rumors no longer belonged only to inmates. Staff themselves spoke of Cole's relationships with multiple women. One prisoner later testified that he overheard two female officers arguing about which of them Cole preferred. The tension spread through the block. Still, supervisors failed to act. On August 22nd, a prison laundry worker discovered a handwritten note in the pocket of Cole's shirt. The message contained affectionate language and referred to a meeting in the medical storeroom. Handwriting analysis confirmed it belonged to a nurse on staff. When questioned, she denied involvement and the matter was dropped. By early autumn, the pattern was consistent. Escort logs showed Cole leaving his housing unit twice as often as the average inmate. Minor infractions that would have triggered punishment for others were absent from his file. During this period, the first pregnancies linked to Cole are believed to have occurred, though they would not surface until later in the year. In October, undeniable warning signs emerged. A former staff member who had resigned 2 months earlier gave birth to a child. The resemblance to Cole was so striking that gossip spread instantly. A serving officer reported the matter informally, but management chose silence. On October 12th, the infirmary processed a pregnancy-related blood test request from a female officer assigned repeatedly to K Block. Duty rosters showed numerous unscheduled visits to Cole's unit over the past 6 months. This time, the chief medical officer documented the matter and alerted the deputy warden. On October 23rd, surveillance staff conducting a random review flagged irregular footage Cole and a nurse entering the medical storeroom and remaining inside for 18 minutes. The door locked from within. The nurse later claimed the lock had jammed, but the timeline did not match the recording. Weeks later, a civilian clerk submitted an anonymous written statement. She described entering the records room after hours and finding Cole inside with a female officer. Both appeared startled. She explained that she withheld her identity out of fear of retaliation. By November 10th, the deputy warden had compiled 3 separate pieces of evidence: the anonymous statement, the medical request records, and the surveillance footage. Together they painted a picture that could no longer be dismissed. He recommended an internal inquiry. The scandal was about to break open. On November 20th, 1995, the warden of North Lake Prison could no longer contain the growing evidence within the institution's chain of command. The reports, the footage, and the unexplained medical records demanded escalation. That morning, the National Prison Investigation Agency was formally contacted. Within days, a specialized team arrived on site under the code name Operation Grey Hall. Their first step was containment. Investigators set up a secure office inside the administrative wing. Before questioning began, they ordered duplication of every escort log, medical record, and correspondence log tied to Adrian Cole dating back to his arrival in January. Surveillance tapes were seized and copied under agency supervision to prevent tampering. The goal was simple: establish a chain of custody so airtight that no defense could claim interference. By November 26th, discreet interviews began. Staff whose duty records placed them in close contact with Cole were approached quietly. Away from colleagues, several admitted to friendly conversations and social contact outside professional limits. None confessed to sexual activity, but each confirmed breaches of protocol, unauthorized letters, smuggled food, unsupervised visits. Investigators noted every word. The deeper they looked, the more irregularities emerged. Escort logs contained 34 vague or undocumented entries where Cole was moved to storage rooms, workshops, and the infirmary without proper authorization. Surveillance footage confirmed several of these incidents: Cole entering the maintenance workshop with a female officer in July and remaining for 23 minutes, Another sequence in August showing a nurse disabling a corridor camera before locking herself inside a room with him for 20 minutes. Mail records revealed over 200 letters sent from staff addresses disguised as family friends. At least 12 contained language that was explicitly intimate. Telephone logs showed multiple unauthorized calls routed to staff members' private residences. Cole was not simply receiving attention, he was operating in an environment where boundaries had collapsed entirely. In early December, the investigation turned to science. Under the guise of a routine health study, investigators quietly collected DNA samples from infants born to former staff members in recent months. By December 10th, 3 samples matched the same male profile. It was Adrian Cole. The findings confirmed what had once been rumor pregnancies inside and outside North Lake Prison linked directly to a serving inmate. By mid-December, the investigative objective was set. Operation Greyhall would map every unauthorized contact, confirm paternity wherever possible, and prepare airtight cases for prosecution. On January 8, 1996, a breakthrough came. A former nurse, questioned about her resignation months earlier, admitted she was pregnant. When pressed on the timing, she ended the interview abruptly. Days later, through her solicitor, she provided a voluntary DNA sample. The result was undeniable, another match to Adrian Cole. By January 15th, 4 confirmed DNA matches tied Cole to children of current or former employees. 3 more matches confirmed ongoing pregnancies. Cross-referencing with duty rosters revealed at least 9 women under prenatal care, 7 of whom had repeated unscheduled access to K-Block. The scale was no longer a matter of speculation, it was fact. The file now contained surveillance stills, phone logs, intercepted letters, and DNA matches. At least 18 women were directly or circumstantially tied to Cole through pregnancy, correspondence, or suspicious contact. The evidence was overwhelming. By late January, Operation Greyhall was ready to move. The quiet phase of the investigation was over. Direct action was about to begin. At 7 a.m. on February 2, 1996, Operation Greyhall shifted from evidence gathering to direct action. The plan was executed with military precision. A combined team from the National Prison Investigation Agency and Kingsford County Police entered North Lake Prison with sealed warrants for searches and arrests. Their first priority was Adrian Cole. Cole was removed from his K-Block cell without warning, escorted to an interview room in the administrative wing. His personal property was seized. Every letter, photograph, and scrap of writing cataloged for forensic review. Simultaneously, 8 employees were detained inside the prison, 4 female correctional officers, 2 nurses, and 2 clerical workers. Each was escorted to secured rooms for questioning. Lockers, handbags, and desks were searched. Every personal note or photograph was logged as evidence. Beyond the prison walls, police units raided the homes of 5 former employees identified in the investigation. Letters, phone records, and personal effects were collected. In several residences, investigators recovered keepsakes traced directly to Cole. The operation, planned for months, unfolded in hours. By mid-morning, interviews began. Cole was confronted with DNA results linking him to multiple pregnancies. He responded calmly, insisting no crime had been committed because all relationships were consensual. Investigators reminded him under British law, consent was irrelevant. Sexual contact between staff and prisoners was unlawful by definition. Among the detained staff, reactions varied. 2 admitted immediately to sexual contact, describing Cole as respectful and claiming they had been emotionally vulnerable. Others denied involvement but could not explain surveillance footage, call logs, or medical records tying them to him. By afternoon, 7 employees were under arrest, charged with misconduct in public office. unlawful sexual activity with a prisoner, and in some cases, perjury for earlier false statements. Others were suspended pending further inquiry. Searches of Cole's cell uncovered hidden letters behind a wall panel and an address book listing first names and telephone numbers of staff. It confirmed what investigators already suspected: Cole was maintaining multiple overlapping relationships, actively managing them from inside his cell. The arrest had immediate consequences. North Lake Prison, already strained, was thrown into crisis. Staffing shortages forced the consolidation of housing units. The scandal leaked to the press within days, headlines describing it as one of the most extraordinary collapses of discipline in British prison history. Court proceedings began quickly. On February 7th, 7 defendants, 4 officers, 2 nurses, and 1 clerk appeared before the magistrates. 5 were remanded into custody. 2 were released under strict bail conditions. A week later, on February 15th, formal charges were filed against Adrian Cole, 18 counts of sexual activity with staff while in custody, possession of prohibited items, and conspiracy to breach prison security. His legal team entered pleas of not guilty, claiming the women initiated contact. The first staff trial began on April 9, 1996 at Kingsford Crown Court. The prosecution presented DNA evidence tying Cole to 3 pregnancies, surveillance footage of unsupervised encounters, and movement logs proving unauthorized access. The defense argued vulnerability and blurred emotions, but the judge was clear consent had no place in law where custody existed. On April 26th, guilty verdicts were returned for all 4 defendants. Sentences ranged from 18 months to 3 years. The second staff trial concluded in June. Evidence was weaker, but 2 defendants were convicted and given suspended sentences. 2 others were acquitted. Then came Cole's own trial. Beginning June 17th, over 2 weeks, prosecutors laid out the full scope: 18 pregnancies linked to a single inmate, 7 confirmed by DNA. Former inmates testified that Cole openly boasted of his relationships and believed he could avoid consequences. Cole himself took the stand, claiming he had been the passive recipient of unwanted attention. The prosecution countered with letters, calls, and surveillance showing him as the active instigator. On July 3, 1996, the jury returned its verdict guilty on all counts. Cole received an additional 5 years in prison, consecutive to his original sentence, with no parole for the first decade. The criminal phase of the North Lake scandal had ended, but its consequences were only beginning. The July 1996 conviction of Adrian Cole marked the end of the criminal proceedings, but it was only the beginning of the fallout. Within hours of sentencing, the Ministry of Justice ordered a full administrative inquiry into North Lake Prison. A review panel was appointed to determine how a modern facility had allowed such widespread misconduct to take root. The inquiry uncovered a system rotting from within. Senior management had received multiple warnings about unusual staff behavior in K Block, yet failed to act. Surveillance coverage was incomplete. Escort logs were irregular, often missing or falsified. Oversight was weak, boundaries ignored. The final report, released September 2, 1996, described the scandal as a complete collapse of professional standards. The panel issued sweeping recommendations: mandatory rotation of staff assignments every 3 months to prevent familiarity with inmates, installation of continuous surveillance in storerooms, workshops, and medical units, with footage retained for at least a year, creation of an independent internal affairs unit to bypass local prison management in cases of misconduct, compulsory ethics and boundaries training for all employees, with annual refreshers, zero tolerance for personal relationships between staff and inmates, with automatic dismissal and referral for prosecution. North Lake underwent an immediate restructuring. More than 20 employees who were never charged still lost their jobs for policy breaches or failing to report suspicious conduct. The warden was placed on administrative leave, 2 deputy wardens and the chief of security were reassigned within 3 years. None of the senior officials from the Cole era remained at the prison. The impact rippled nationwide. By 1997, reforms had been rolled out across the prison service. Surprise inspections became routine. Ethics course completion rates reached nearly universal compliance. For the first time, prison culture was being re-engineered from the ground up. Public reaction was fierce. Editorials condemned the negligence. Advocacy groups reminded the public that laws prohibiting sexual contact between inmates and staff existed not only to protect inmates, but to protect the integrity of the system itself. The scandal became a case study in how quickly professional boundaries collapse when oversight falters. For those involved, the personal cost was permanent. 2 officers served full prison terms and disappeared from public view. A nurse convicted in the first trial left the country after her release. Those who received suspended sentences found themselves permanently barred from public service, their reputations destroyed. As for Adrian Cole, his name became synonymous with systemic failure. Transferred to a maximum security facility after his conviction, he lived under constant supervision. Parole applications in the 2000s were repeatedly denied. He remained behind bars, serving out the extended sentence handed down in 1996. By 2010, the scandal resurfaced in documentaries about high-profile prison failures. Interviews with former inmates and staff reinforced his image as both manipulator and symbol, the man who exposed the weaknesses of an entire system. In criminology courses and correctional training programs, the North Lake case became required study. Decades later, the lessons remain stark. A single inmate, under the right conditions, exploited weak supervision and personal vulnerabilities to destabilize an entire institution. The scandal proved that small breaches, if ignored, will escalate into systemic collapse. Professional boundaries are not optional. When they fail, trust in the system fails with them. The name Adrian Cole is remembered not for his crime in a nightclub, but for what he revealed inside North Lake Prison, that the walls meant to contain him could not contain the collapse of discipline, oversight, and accountability.